I know I say this before every show. Might as well say it again today. We have a very, very interesting guest, and the subject matter is very, very thought provoking. And so, our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Adam Swart, and he is the CEO and founder of a company called Crowds on Demand. Now, we have been seeing all these protests, a lot of them on the campuses and various places. We know that that molds people's thoughts and it affects basically the way things are perceived, and it dictates social policies as well. So I found out, I had heard before that a lot of these protests are not attended by people who are just fighting for the cause, but they're getting paid for it, like 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 actors, extras. People they get X dollars, and we're going to ask about how much they're getting, etc. But right now, one of the hottest subject matters is free speech, and we know we've heard this expression that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, etc. By the way, that's not the law anymore. But the fact of the matter is, there's a fine line between free speech and censorship. And the reality is, cases are evolving and developing, and that's what we're going to talk to Adam about as well. Now, we know that free speech means you can say which pretty much what you want to say, whether it's tasteful or not. But the difference is that if you're using that speech to incite an action that is deleterious to the public, that's not okay. So, without further ado, let me introduce you all to Adam Swart. Good afternoon, Adam.
Judge, it is a pleasure to be with you and with your lovely audience.
Well, when I was offered the opportunity to talk with you, I said, this is a really timely subject. Not only
Yep.
is it interesting, but and informative, but it is timely. And we try very much to keep pace with what's going on in the world by having guests who address it. We've done shows on health issues, we've done shows on politics, we've done shows on just about everything. This one's kind of unique. So, first, tell us a little about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, I'm probably best known for founding and running a company called Crowds on Demand. We are the largest protest company in the country. We are 13 plus years old at this point. I started the business in college. We're known for kind of innovative PR stunts, publicity demonstrations, but probably whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, we're best known for doing advocacy campaigns and protests and compensating demonstrators to show go out there and speak their minds. So I started this business because I saw the opportunity. I saw how important it was to have people out there who were compensated because campaigns require it. There's a benefit for protests, there's a benefit for companies, there's a benefit for publicity, there's a huge demand to get people out there. And as we've evolved the business, we've put even more strain to make sure that these are really good, articulate, passionate people who agree with the subject matter and who are really serve as brand ambassadors for whatever the cause it is that they're espousing.
Do they have to agree with the subject matter or whatever it is that's being addressed, or are
For
these
like
just paid actors?
No, well, see, that's a little bit of a misnomer, and part of why I kind of reached out and wanted to come on, and I wanted to come on to a few. I've been doing a lot of media lately, is because I think there's so much misinformation about what we do that it felt like it was incumbent upon me to start going on media to clarify some of the misinformation. So one of the big pieces of misinformation is these are just hired actors. They don't really care about the subject matter. We do use actors still for publicity stunts, corporate, publicity, that type of thing. But when it comes to advocacy events, we make sure that everyone there agrees with the subject matter. So if they're an actor, that's great, but they still have to agree with the subject matter. And we actually vet people. We have a call with each person who participates in each one of our events before each event, where we talk about the subject matter and we make sure that we're on the same page.
So if you're a pro-Palestinian, people that participate in these events are pro-Palestinian anyway, or are there instances where people are doing it no matter what the subject matter is because they're getting a paycheck?
Well, I'll put it this way, Judge. Think about it. I'll give you two examples, right? So think about Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow. Those are kind of two of the most highly paid people in the media, opinion speakers, right? Or Joe Rogan, right? I mean, Joe Rogan, 8 to 9 figures. Rachel Maddow makes 8 figures. I mean, we're talking tens of millions, $100 million plus. And they're given the benefit of the doubt that they're speaking their sincere point of view. So I think it's a little bit demeaning to say that a protester who's getting a few $100s is somehow not speaking their sincere point of view, right? I mean, does that make any sense to you?
Well, what makes sense to me is people do things for money, and
But
they're going to get a couple of $100 to some people. There's a substantial amount of money they'll say or do pretty much what they want. I'm curious about one question, Adam, just
Sure.
thinking about it. Now, a lot of these protests, people are carrying or waving signs. Do they get anything extra because they carry a sign versus those who don't carry a sign? Versus, like, it's like the actors who have a speaking role, or they're just extras and walk-ons.
Yeah, well, the more people do, the more they generally will get paid. We tend to assess that on site. Typically, we like everybody to hold a sign if they're physically capable of doing that, and if they're not holding a sign, they're passing out flyers, or they're doing something that helps the cause, right? People who are just standing there don't tend to do a lot, right? I mean, some people are chant leaders, for example. So everyone has different skills, and it is quite tough work holding a sign, because that can be quite heavy if you're out there for a few hours. So, and again, you're kind of making my case, judges, that honestly, people, this is hard work and it should be compensated, right? It's kind of ridiculous that a lot of these talk show hosts and all these people, they get a ton of money to speak their opinion, and that's all fine and dandy. And then someone who's protesting can't get paid a few $100 to express their sincere point of view. They're being called all kinds of defamatory names, you know? So I don't buy that for 1 second.
I know this is a generalization, but
yeah.
And looking at the crowd size, for example, what percentage generally are people who are being paid?
100%. 100% of all protesters are paid, and I'll tell you why. Because there are different forms of compensation. 100% are not receiving cash compensation, but 100% of people who are demonstrating any event are receiving compensation because they're getting something for attending, right? They're getting a picture on Instagram that then they can post to show how virtuous they are. They're getting, maybe they're meeting a girl. I mean, Woodstock, half the people there were just trying to get laid and smoke pot, right? So, like, I mean, they're getting something, right? I mean, MAGA rallies, are like a county fair. They're really fun. They're community events, right? A ton of labor unions are infamous for giving good shifts to people who attend protests and bad shifts to people who don't attend the events, right? Half the people at a lot of these political events are actually political staffers. They're off-duty political staffers. They work as a legislative aide during the day, and then they're expected to go to political events on their off time, right? So what I'm saying is everyone who's going somewhere has some kind of motivation for being there. Otherwise, we don't go, right? That's just welcome to humanity, Judge.
Well, we also know, and I read this in your bio, that a lot of people do not go to protests because they can't take time off from work.
That's right.
And so they have a feeling and a belief, but they can't express it. And you fill the void by providing live bodies, basically.
Well, yeah. Well, number one, we help people. We're often the voice of what I call the silent majority, right? Which is you have a lot of issues that are 80-20 or 90-10 issues where the minority is just extremely boisterous. They're going to every hearing, they're going to every city council event, whatever, right? And then on the other side, maybe the people have jobs, they have other things, right, going on, so they don't show up. So we often fill that void and speak for the silent majority and compensate those people because those people support the other side of the issue, but they have too many responsibilities. They might have a 9-to-5 job, they might have kids, they might have all kinds of responsibilities. Because, like, I'll give you an example, is if you think about it, the British Parliament a few hundred years ago, when we separated from Britain, we're close to July 4th, so it's a Independence Day reference, is they did not pay members of Parliament. So who, pray tell, do you think was able to join the Parliament? Only the landed gentry, the very rich. So protests have that same dynamic, right? If only people who are able to take time off of work, only people who have the sort of flexibility, either they don't have kids, they don't have an hourly job, they don't have a 9-to-5 job, whatever, are able to come, do you think only upper middle class academics, flex workers, tech workers, hippies with a trust fund should be able to go out and speak their mind? Or do you think that should be open to a broader swath of the population who might need that incentive to be able to show up?
Well, it's always been said it's all about the money, but I hear what you're having to say. Let me ask you a very rhetorical question.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of know the answer already. Of the percentage of people that are on the payroll,
Mm-hmm.
what difference do you think it ultimately makes in social change?
Well, I think it makes a big difference. Wait, so explain the question. The
Well,
fact.
do you think it makes a difference in outcomes, like take political campaigns? Do you think that people who watch these campaigns, whether they're county fairs or whatever, are motivated by either the size of the crowd or the
Well,
way of presentation?
context is everything, as I often say, right? A lot of the greatest speeches of all time would not be great speeches if they were given to 5 people. So I think context is everything, but what I think protest serves the biggest value is as a catalyst, right? What protesting does and rallying does and crowd size does. So maybe to answer that kind of seemingly rhetorical question, is what crowd size does is it gets people to watch, but now you have to convince them with the antics, right? With the ideas, right? So, for example, why did the Palestine movement fail? It's not because they didn't get enough media coverage. The protests got them wall-to-wall media coverage, right wing, left wing, and in between. But they failed to convince people to join their cause in many cases, right? So what protests do and what turnout does that we provide serves as a catalyst. It gets people's attention, and then from there, people are paying attention. There are a lot of amazing causes that, because they never had this sort of catalyst, have never gotten off the ground. And there are a lot of amazing causes that did have this catalyst, right? The greatest movements of all time, civil rights, gay rights, MAGA, Tea Party, everything, it's all been funded by billions of dollars, right? I mean, that's just the United States of America. We're a capitalist nation, right? So that's just sort of the reality. But the real question is, can you take the media attention? Can you get the public attention that you're gaining from the protest and turn that into real change and convince people?
Well, you made a very interesting point, among the others, of course, and that's the funding for all of this. And politics being what it is, great candidates have run and have got 1% of the vote, even though they represent good things, because they don't have the bucks to be able to afford paid publicity.
Correct.
And that paid publicity is a little different than what you're doing, of course. And so, how much of what we see on the streets is actually real?
Well, it depends on the definition of reality. I mean, if you see people protesting, that's real. Like, does it? I think people attach too much. Like, when you say it's fake, your implication in that question. So, I guess I disagree with the implication in the question, right? So, your implication in the question is, do they receive some, how much of what you see of protesters receive some sort of compensation other than the purity of their own convictions? And it's like, yeah, of course that people have an incentive to be there, right? I just told you I'm on your show because I want to correct misinformation. I didn't come on your show for the goodness of my heart, right? You have me on your show because it'll be interesting to your viewers, not because you think because just for the goodness of your heart, right? We all have motivations for being where we are and for doing what we're doing. So I think there's this just false dichotomy that people have about protests where they say, oh, well, there's this grassroots where everything is perfect and everyone has this no ulterior motives, and then this is the evil astroturf that is just funded by money and where people are bussed in who don't give a crap about what's being talked about, when the reality is it's a spectrum. But for the most part, the reality is that people have different motivations, but I don't consider that a bad thing. Pay attention. If you see protesters on the street, especially if they're protesting violently, I condemn it no matter what cause they're protesting. And by the way, that's not something that we engage in at Crowds on Demand. Conversely, if somebody's protesting peacefully and respectfully, hear them out. Do you like what they're saying or do you not like what they're saying? I think only very dumb people.
Go ahead.
I think only very dumb people would see people on the street and interpret that as some sort of pull, right? What people on the street accomplishes is it gets your attention. I'll hear them out. Do they have something interesting to say? Great. If they don't, then I'm not listening.
Well, from a psychological standpoint, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but the reality is, if you hear and see protests with very large amounts of people, and they seem excited about their program, whatever it is that it may be, it does have an influence. And by the way, the reason I have you on the show, you and others, is to educate the public.
Right.
I think most of the time people buy what they hear and see, and so whoever's got the money to afford to pay for it, etc. The reality is that it's about the bucks. And
exactly. I mean, money is important, right? And money can buy eyeballs, but it cannot buy public sentiment. So I'll give you a couple examples again. So, for example, one example of someone who was unable to use money to buy.
Sorry about that. Somebody's trying to call.
No problem. Someone's really trying to get a hold of you.
It's my son, actually. I could see him.
Oh, I love that. I love
anyway.
That. That's lovely.
So anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no problem. But I guess what I would say is, so here's an example, right? Jeb Bush, right? He ran for president. I know whether people remember this gentleman, right? But Jeb Bush, he ran for president 2016, right? He was considered the presumptive Republican nominee, right?
Yes, he was.
He raised $200 million, right? Everybody knew who he was, but he got about 2% in the polls, right?
Right. Perfect example.
Money did not buy votes. It bought him eyeballs, but people used those eyeballs to say, no, not for me, right? So that's an example of where his money didn't do him much good. So yes, and he blanketed the airways with ads. He had, he had paid people probably and all of those sorts of things, right? But ultimately, it didn't help. And conversely, look at the Tea Party, right? The Tea Party was funded by the Koch brothers, by other very wealthy conservatives, right? It started with, I think compensated protesters, wearing the Revolutionary War paraphernalia, 50 people here, 100 people there, conservative media really amplified it. And then it grew. Why? Because it spoke to how people were feeling. So the reality is it's a catalyst. So yes, when you kind of allude to, okay, people are a little bit like sheep. If they see other people, what that does is it gives them the cover to join, right? So if the Kochs and others didn't prime the pump with those protests, then it wouldn't have done much good. But then you wouldn't have been able to grow that movement. But ultimately, they did, and the movement grew. Whereas Jeb Bush, it didn't. So I kind of think that money can buy the eyeballs, and you're completely right that there are probably a lot of amazing candidates who, because they lack the money, were not able to get the eyeballs needed to carry their message, which otherwise would have carried. I
Well,
completely agree with that.
one of the things that we have for the purpose of the show is to give people choice. And we present basically both sides of most issues. And we've had Republicans on the right and Democrats on the left. In fact, we had one that's on the far left.
I love it.
The things that he said I thought were crazy, but the
People
bottom line was the public's entitled to decide, just like a jury is entitled to decide. Sometimes, and there's a perfect example called jury nullification. The jury is told what the law is and how to apply it, and they don't. Why not? Because they don't want to. And so people will do what it is, and that's why I present both sides usually on any issue. And that's why you are here today. What would you say percentage, and I know this is a general question, is really free speech, people really doing what they believe in, versus manipulation?
So the question is, what percentage of what you see of what is free speech versus manipulation?
Yeah, basically, it's all programmed. A lot of it, I shouldn't say all, a lot of it is programmed. People have a message. There's a leader. There's a group. There's people who are financing it. And that's the message. That's being told to the public as a form of manipulation. So what percentage would you say of these protests? I know it's a very broad question. What percentage of these would you say is a manipulation or an attempted manipulation versus a real expression of what you feel like?
I think every protest has the goal, if they're smart, of changing something. Now, I think what you're alluding to isn't the difference between manipulation and true sentiment. It's the difference between smart protest organizers and dumb protest organizers. Dumb protest organizers are a little bit aimless, right? They might protest the city hall over a federal government policy, for example, right? Where it's like you're protesting people who have no power to actually help you because you just frankly don't know any better, right? So I don't think there's a difference other than the fact that everyone who is smart and organized a protest is hoping to gain something from the protest, right? It's not a kumbaya session. The goal is to tell people, we are here because we want you to do this. We are here because we don't want you to do that. Otherwise, there's absolutely no point in going out to protest, right? There should always be a why in protesting. Otherwise, you're just holding signs and jumping around and chanting for nothing. So, in fact, when clients contact me, I always try to really focus them on that, because if we're going to spend money, we're going to spend time, we're going to take people out of whatever they're going to do to protest. I want there to be a clear objective. We might have a long-term goal, medium-term goal, and immediate-term goal from the protest.
Well, we know from at least the reports, assuming that they're accurate, that there's a lot of foreign money involved here.
Yeah.
Like Qatar or Qatar, I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. They have supported schools who will hire people that are sympathetic to their causes. And it's the same thing as they basically hire people to go on college campuses. Some of them, they even give them the tents to sleep in. And so the reality is, what effect, if any, do you think that foreign money has on forming people's opinions and public responses?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you. It's not that hard for foreign money to be brought in, often with knowing kind of assistance from people here, right? Because what all these countries do, and I don't want to name specific countries, but all these countries, they have dummy corporations that are US corporations, and they may have Americans who are working for those dummy corporations who can then make a donation to some foundation or 501c4 group and then fund kind of activism, right? So it's not that hard for them to do, and I'm sure they're doing it. And they could easily hire a PR firm, hire us for all I know, and do it. Now, what I always try to do in Crowds on Demand, because I can't speak for other people in this industry, but Crowds on Demand, we always try to vet. And if what you're doing is seems to undermine this country, even if it seems to be completely above board, I don't want any part of it because I'm a patriotic American. I don't have any desire to undermine the country. That, of course, protest our leaders? Absolutely. I'll protest against conservatives and liberals if they're wrong, but not undermining the very nature of America.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that you feel that way. It's very important that you do. But the reality is you've got competition out there and they're taking the money. And so
and
how do you see it? What have you turned down?
Well, we've turned down a lot, and I don't speak specifically about customers because their privacy is safe with us, even if we choose not to work with them. But we've gotten hundreds of kind of requests on the dealing with the Israel-Palestine situation. We turned that down, just like we turned down the ICE stuff, the anti-ICE stuff, because I don't like to put people in a frying pan that is very, very where it's very tense like that. And the reason for that is because you can have peaceful protesters there, but if either the other side or other people on your side are getting very heated, throwing Molotov cocktails, whatever, then you're in a situation where the police have trouble distinguishing between the guy holding the sign and the guy throwing a Molotov cocktail or throwing a brick. And I don't want to put our people in the center of that. When we do engage like Crowds on Demand in kind of these sort of more tense type things, what we try to do is we tend to hire security to assist on the ground to make sure our people are safe, or at least to do our best efforts on that. So the other reason I said no to those guys is just because I don't like to do a bunch what I call like unnuanced yelling. I like to actually feel like we're looking at a problem and trying to solve it and coming up with a nuanced idea and hitting people with protests I kind of like to flank people with protests, like doing something that no one else is doing, because we're introducing inventive talking points. We're more creative. It's more fun. And we have the opportunity to convince people. Now, I've been in this business for 13 years. I don't need to take on every person who comes to me. We've got basically every social cause contacts us at some point or another. So I have the choice of who to work with. So I don't want to work on something that isn't interesting and not something that's not impactful. I don't need the money. I don't want to do it. So I want to do something that's either creative, impactful, or something that's kind of apolitical and just sort of more promotional.
How do you think the government is responding to these, I'm calling it manipulations? How do you think they're responding to it?
Well, what's an example of how a manipulation, and what is an example of a response in your books?
It's actually it's a free speech issue. It comes down to a lot of times. In fact, some of the key cases involved not liked people. For example, the case in Skokie, Illinois.
Yes,
back probably about 30 years ago, and
those were Jewish
landmark law. And so the Ku Klux Klan wanted to have a rally. And of course, the people in Skokie, many of whom were Holocaust survivors, objected to it. And so the case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And so the question really is, if something is as bad or as heinous as what they represent, how's the government responding, if at all?
Well, and my I completely agree with the ACLU's stance on that. And I think it's noteworthy that it was, I believe, a team of Jewish ACLU lawyers who defended those neo-Nazis. And the reason they did it was because if we can't protect the most heinous form of speech, then no form of speech is truly protected. Well, my opinion is we have to distinguish between speech and actions, right? So what they did was speech. Offensive speech is acceptable speech, right? But action is separate. So if you're blocking roads without a permit, if you're vandalizing, if you're creating violence, that needs to be completely unacceptable. And it shouldn't matter with what cause you claim to affiliate yourself with. That needs to be unacceptable. But conversely, it doesn't matter what cause you're affiliating yourself with, you should be allowed to freely and peacefully demonstrate. So I think the problem, my issue with generally how the government has conducted itself is they've gone harder on people that they find offensive. So if it's a left-wing prosecutor or a left-wing university administrator, they're going to take on right-wing speech very harshly. And if it's a conservative prosecutor, they're going to take on left-wing speech more harshly, right? And I don't support that. I think what we need, and I'm actually, Judge, I'm working on this right now, a set of uniform rights and responsibilities for protesters that I believe needs to be adopted nationally, where it says this is, if protesters are speaking out peacefully, their rights must be protected, and not just protected, facilitated by law enforcement, no matter how heinous you might think their views are. But if there's vandalism and violence, those people who are engaged in that must be prosecuted and arrested and put to justice. But the fact that there are violent people within a broader crowd of peaceful people cannot be used against the peaceful people. If we in America don't believe in collective justice, right? We believe in individual justice, as you know, right? So if you throw a Molotov cocktail, you should go to jail. But if someone next to you is holding a peaceful sign, that person who did not throw a Molotov cocktail should not be blamed for someone next to them who did.
Do you think that staged unrest justifies additional surveillance by the government?
Well, what I think, again, that's a slippery slope, because what defines unrest and what defines staged, right? Those are very subjective terms. The word staged just means planned, right? Well, anyone who's planning a protest is quote unquote staging a protest, right? And unrest, you could call a peaceful protest unrest. I wouldn't, but so I kind of would push back on that question, just because I don't agree with the premise. If what you're referring to is money from foreign countries that is bankrolling violent riots, yes, I believe that those people should be prosecuted, right? There's a gentleman who I won't name his name, but who was generally considered to be, he's an American, very wealthy American who has a long time association with the Chinese government, who some have said is associated with the recent LA riots. If what people are reporting turns out to be true, yes, that should be, if he's buying tactical gear, if he's buying bricks, Molotov cocktails, yeah, of course he should be prosecuted. But as a civil libertarian, I don't love the idea of giving government more power over free speech.
Well, we talked about billionaires like the Koch brothers, etc.,
Yeah.
and George Soros and others like his ilk. Do you think that they play a role in co-opting authentic activism?
I think they are activism, because they put their money behind causes that they like. I mean, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? The activists would say, oh, well, we started this movement and we're happy to have their support of these billionaires. right? But in reality, once you support an organization, it's like when you invest in a company, you sort of control the company, right? If you're an activist investor in a company, once you purchase 50% of the company, you basically own the company, right? Similarly, if you're donating to BLM or you're donating to the NRA or whatever, and your donations reach a certain point, you effectively control those organizations. So they do sort of control what these guys say.
And that includes foreign governments too, doesn't it?
Well, that's hard to prove because foreign governments funding causes domestically is illegal. So, you know, you'd have to show the evidence that they are doing it. I certainly agree with you that I think they are doing it, and there is evidence that certain hostile regimes have kind of bankrolled protests in the past. And by the way, it's not, for the most part, unfortunately, not peaceful protests that they're bankrolling. What they want to do, just in terms of motivation, it's less about the cause and more about making America look bad. Because on the streets of Tehran, on the streets of Beijing and Moscow and Caracas, right, and all of these other autocratic regimes, people come out to demand the same freedoms and prosperity that we have in America. Right. So what they want to do is they want to tear us down, and they want to show images on state TV. Well, now they do it on social media to be like, actually, America's a shithole. There are riots every day. There's violence. There's all of this stuff. There's tear gas. They're no better than us. So you should be grateful for our leadership. Right. So my attitude of Crowds on Demand is I have no interest in taking on causes that are trying to delegitimize this country.
Well, that's political science 101. I mean, that's reality. In fact, anybody who's got any sense or familiarity with political science recognizes that the Russians and the Chinese for years have been looking to sow distrust and dislike for our country. And that's why they portray us in a negative way. Do you think the government should get involved with that kind of thing? I know you said it's illegal. I'm not sure we have a definition of what illegality is involved in these situations, because it's going to vary in terms of degree. But the reality, do you think the government should get involved?
Yeah, but they shouldn't use that as a pretense to restrict legitimate free speech, though. A lot of your questions center around, do I think the government should do this or the government should do that? And I don't want to open the door for the government to start using foreign money, kind of like they do in Russia, right? What they'll do is they'll arrest activist group members because they've gotten money from US NGOs, right? And they'll say, oh, well, that's foreign interference, right? So I don't want to create a situation where we're trying to delegitimize free speech by using foreign action as a pretense, but I do think it is a problem. But that should be addressed, but it needs to be addressed on a kind of pinpoint basis. And part of that is I think we should make it harder to bring kind of money from some of those overseas places, and we should look at that money that's coming from abroad.
One of the big problems, and it applies to the law as well, is that there's so many variations and degrees of all activities, really, that it's hard sometimes to pinpoint a real problem because of the variations.
Yeah.
Do you think there should be some legislation somewhere that will pass muster, of course, that will somehow define the areas where we need to be involved and those that we are really infringing on people's rights?
That's right. I support that. I support a common set of principles that leaves less discretion to political appointees. Like as I said before, if you vandalize a building, the penalty should be the same whether you're just a dumb kid, whether you're a Nazi, whether you're a Palestine activist, MAGA activist, BLM activist. Vandalism is vandalism, right? And same thing for throwing a brick, throwing a Molotov cocktail, right? And simultaneously, I think it has to be ideological neutral, right? So in America, your views are legal, your actions are the ones that could be illegal. So
may or may not, but
may
depending
or
on
may
who's.
not be, right?
Look, the
So,
reality is, from the legal standpoint, courts in various places are going to be different than courts in other places. That's just the way it is. And that's why people do what they call forum shopping, looking
and I
for
don't
the
like
right judge in the right places. But the reality is, there's so many variables that it's pretty hard to
I don't approve for
define
all of
it.
the forum shopping, right? Where you're going to find someone who's friendly, who you think is going to be friendly to your cause, and then kind of take it from there. I mean, that's lawfare, in my opinion.
It's
And
reality. It's reality, buddy. Let me tell you, that is absolute reality. You'd
yeah,
rather be in downtown Los Angeles with a personal injury case if you're a plaintiff than someplace else where people are much more conservative. The judges are more conservative, etc. So
that's
the
right.
reality is, I want to thank you very much, Adam. It was a very, very interesting discussion, and I have a whole different perspective now, actually, than what I thought before you were on the show. So thanks again for being on the show, and keep doing the good work and protect free speech.
Absolutely, you too. So nice to be with you, Judge Herb, and hope to be on your show again sometime.
Maybe. Looking forward to it. Thanks again, Adam.
Thanks so much.